24th, 2021. This meeting is held remotely via WHCA Zoom webinar in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, small c, 30A, section 20. This meeting will be a live broadcast on WHCA TV and online. All attendees must register in advance on the Zoom webinar link below. Community members must register in order to participate in the public hearing. We're going to have a public hearing of the FY 2022 school budget, and we'll start. And we'll start by, as we always start, and remind everyone that we are live, and we are recording this meeting, and we are broadcasting live, so keep that in mind. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Also, would you please join me in a moment of silence? Thank you. I'm calling the meeting to order with a roll call. All votes will be roll call votes. So, having said that, Mr. Small.
Here.
Ms. Byers.
Here.
Ms. Niffen.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Boyce.
Here.
Good. Mr. Scriven.
Here.
Mr. Jones. I already did Mr. Jones. Mr. Howard.
Here.
Mr. Hayes. Here. Did I miss anyone?
David.
David Ford.
Here.
Thank you, David.
And Dan's missing. Okay.
Mr. Cullity is absent. He's had a somewhat of an emergency that he's taking care of, so he will not be with us this evening. Okay. I entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved by Mr. Small.
Second by Mr. Boyce.
Okay. Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Hayes, yes. Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Scriven. Scrub.
Yep.
Mr. Boyce.
Yes.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Niffen.
Yes.
Ms. Byers.
Yes.
Mr. Small.
Yes.
Okay, the public meeting is open. Before we go any further, I've just got a couple important dates to remember. March 3rd, Facility Subcommittee, 5 p.m. at the high school library. March 3rd, School Committee meeting, 6 p.m. in the high school library. March 10th, School Committee meeting, 6 p.m. in the high school library. March 16th,
17.
School Negotiation Subcommittee, 4:30, high school library, but that is for the Negotiation Subcommittee. And March 17th, School Committee meeting, 6 p.m. in the high school library. The public hearing is open. Superintendent Simonak.
So before we get going on the public hearing, I'm going to invite Ryan Tully from Cable to outline for participants out there who are in the waiting room how to participate in this public hearing. This public hearing won't cease until my budget presentation is over, so people can have an opportunity to ask questions either prior to or after the budget presentation, which I would ask people in the community not to ask questions as we are presenting. We will absolutely give you time to speak after the presentation is over. So Ryan, give us your 2 cents, please.
Okay, so to everybody in the attendees, when the public speaking is happening, what you'll have to do is use the raise hand feature that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And what that will do is put a little raised hand next to your name in the attendees list. And if you have a question, use the raise hand feature. And once the floor is open to questions, we will select you. If you, for some reason, you have your hand raised and you're not getting selected, please use the chat feature, which you can see at the bottom as well, and just say, for some reason, I'm not being called on, please allow me to talk. And so what we will do is when you raise your hand and it's your turn to speak, we'll allow you to talk, and that'll bring you into the meeting, not as a panelist, but as a speaker, and you will be able to ask your questions. Please lower your hand if for some reason your question gets answered beforehand, or you don't, you've already answered your question. That feature is right at the bottom. It'll be in the same place where the raise hand button is. Once you raise it, you can lower.
Turn the volume up.
Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, use a little patience. This is a new setup that we're using, and the reason we're doing it is so we could have more public back and forth and more comments. So it's new to us as it is to you. It's not like the old Zoom that we would be doing on an iPad so please be a little patient. We will get to you. Again, as Ryan said, if I'm not recognizing you, go to the chat portion and we most certainly won't shut anyone out. Thank you.
So before I begin, I'm just looking to see if anybody wants to make any comment before I begin the formal presentation. I'm looking to see at our attendees if anybody has their hand raised.
Seeing none,
I don't see any, so I'm going to move forward. And again, bear with us as this is new. I think it's going to work out really well, but it is new for us. So tonight we're going to discuss the fiscal 22 budget. Today's February 24th, 2021. Outlining what we will be doing over the next couple months. We have our public hearing presentation tonight. March 3rd is going to be a school committee meeting, which we would normally talk about budget, but due to circumstances within the state as far as trying to reopen schools, we have a scheduled meeting on the 3rd, specifically about reopening our school buildings and bringing our children back into the classrooms. March 10th, we will go through the entire budget book. Our school committee members do not have a budget book tonight. They have an opportunity to see this presentation. Our budget book will have the line by line detail. It will be an opportunity for people to ask questions as well. We will have that as a live meeting, and we will also have public comment at the beginning of that meeting. March 17th is technically the date we need to vote on our budget moving forward to the towns, giving towns 45 days. However, I had a very good conversation with both town administrators today, offering them the opportunity to use our fields again to host town meetings prior to graduation, which is on June 4th, or post-graduation. Both town administrators seemed very interested in having the town meeting starting the Monday after graduation on the fields that we had last year, which I believe were pretty successful. If we move that date to town meeting to June 7th or June 9th, we will not have to vote our budget on the 17th. So details to follow on that. We did earmark other dates, just as specific budget sessions outside of normal school committee meetings in April if we don't have a budget. And again, if we move the town meeting, as we have done in the past, we have school committee meetings about budget and moving monies around and what's appropriate for the town all the way up to town meeting, and even so on town meeting floor. These are items of concern and questions that are are not really within our control right now. Opening of school for the fall of 2021. As many of you know, yesterday, the Commissioner of the State of Education of DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Jeff Riley, spoke with the Governor of Massachusetts and talked about reopening schools in the spring. That being said, he outlined some stipulations that we are following in Whitman-Hanson as far as how we educate our students. Our goal is to bring all of our students back in person, but he also outlined an option for students who are remote, or giving parents the option to have remote learning through the end of this school year, 2021. I don't know next year if that is going to be an option for our students in the way we have set that up this year. If that is an option, we have to think long and hard about how it affects the school budget. In this budget presentation today, I do not offer a remote learning platform or remote learning in-house for any student in Whitman-Hanson to go remote next year. We will have to make a decision on if they choice out to one of the state local online schools, but in this budget presentation, we don't have an online option or a remote option. Other concerns for next year, I don't know if we're going to have to mandatory test teachers and students or pool test or any of the other testing options that are out there. That hasn't been outlined in the guidelines for opening next year. That is also not in the budget. My hope, if that is a mandate, it's a funded mandate and not an underfunded or unfunded mandate, either from the state or from the federal government. So opening next year is a large question mark, both of how many of our students are going to come back and how we're going to educate them, and just getting people in the building financially, how that would affect us. All of our bargaining units, the teachers, the administrators who are assistant principals and directors, the secretaries, which are Unit C, and our paraprofessionals, Unit D, all of our bargaining units are up this year, and that's why you heard Mr. Hayes speak about the negotiation subcommittee. We are already actively involved in negotiations with at least Unit A. Retirements and contractual obligations. When I say retirements, teachers in Whitman-Hanson have until March 1st to notify me if they're going to retire in the fall of 2022 or in the spring of 2022. We don't have all of those in yet. And a little known fact out there, which I came across, is that there is a bill in the House right now for an early retirement incentive for teachers in the Commonwealth. It's just a bill. It is not law. It has not been discussed yet. But there might be an early retirement incentive for teachers that could either play a positive financial impact to this district or a negative financial impact to this district. If that moves forward in the House, it does say that school committees will have the opportunity to whether or not accept teachers who take this early retirement incentive. I don't know a whole lot about it because it's just a bill and it hasn't been publicized well, but this is a concern of mine if it would have a negative impact to our FY22 budget. Contractual obligations are our buses, our cleaning company, which is SJ Services right now, and Collegiate Press, which is our photocopy company. We have contractual obligations. 2 of those contracts are up this year, and we're actively negotiating. State aid, meaning Chapter 70, we never know. It has been relatively consistent off of the cherry sheets that we look at, but until the governor's budget is signed, we don't know what we will be getting in Chapter 78. Transportation reimbursement, in my tenure here, has gone from 55% to 87%, and it looks like we're looking at 74% this year in reimbursement, but that's also a moving target, so it's hard to budget a moving target. Special education tuitions has been specifically problematic during COVID. Many of our out-of-district placements who are day school students have had their facilities shut down, meaning there's been significant regression potentially, and we've seen some significant regression from those students, and those parents right now are asking for some residential placements. Our Director of Special Education and Pupil Personnel are working with parents, with our attorneys, and potentially with the Board of Education in hearings to determine whether or not we will be moving some of those students to residential placements. For the public out there, special education out-of-district placements can range anywhere from $45,000 to $325,000 per student, and that doesn't include transportation. So special education tuitions are also a question mark for us in fiscal 2022. Health and building insurances are always on the increase. We've earmarked a few of those increases later on in this budget, but if they go above that, those things are out of our control. And we are in negotiations with the Whitman Water Department on a water bill we received from 2005 of an underpayment, and both the school committees and both towns have been involved in negotiating a settlement for that water bill. So that's an unknown and an item of concern for us right now. What I am proposing today with my team is a level services plus budget, assuming we start a traditional school year in September. The FY22 budget is a level services plus budget. I believe what we're asking for minimally supports our educational and our operational needs, maintains current staffing levels pre-K to 12, As many of you know, and I'm very thankful for both towns for approving our budget last year, we were able to increase staffing at the teaching level to reduce class size by 4 teachers last year, so thank you very much. This budget proposal maintains that current staffing level that we have right now. It addresses the anticipated regression due to COVID-19. We are putting in people and personnel to address what we don't know yet is anticipated regressions, especially K-8. So you will see that in this presentation. This budget provides additional special education programming to try to retain our students from going out of district. Years back, we cut quite a few special ed programs and ended up shipping out some of our students, which we would like to retain in our district. So we would like to continue on adding programming to keep our students here. It's an initial cost in this budget, but as years go by, and even maybe in this fiscal year, we will see monies coming back to the district and keeping our kids here. Other additional programming will also allow our students who have regressed that specific special education or special ed support that they need due to being out of school in COVID-19. I'm asking that we restore a high school science teacher that we cut a couple of years back in the loss of the 19.2 staff members. One of the high school teachers was cut, which in turn led us to have a teacher teach out of license, which is really not allowed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I'd like to restore a high school science teacher in this budget. And then it begins a refresh cycle on our outdated Chromebooks. We mentioned in our technology pitch a couple weeks ago about the infrastructure. We also have a significant amount of Chromebooks that will be out of life, so to speak, for the new implementation from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the software that they need for us to take MCAS. So years back, if members, school committee remember, and people in town remember, we actually had a lease agreement to start rebuilding our Chromebooks. We would like to begin that once again in this budget cycle. Specifically, these are the additions to level service that we're proposing today. I'm going to ask Mr. Farrow to talk a little bit about the intervention regression program, which we're asking for 4 staff members.
Good evening, folks. So when we look at intervention and we look at regression, one of the things that's come from the state level, one of the things that come from the national level, and here locally is what are we doing to make sure our students who might have left us in March behind when COVID started, and what are we doing to bring them up to speed at grade level? What are we doing to make sure that they're okay and all right? When I'm speaking of interventions, just for this short time frame I'll be speaking, I'm speaking of academic interventions. So what we would like to do is have a district elementary intervention team. One would focus on math, one would focus on literacy. The goal of that would be is that they would be coordinating all of our interim assessments. They would then also be working to say, once we have the data, what are the interventions we're using? Interventions would range from in the class with the regular ed teacher, so that training, that support that's needed would then go to small groups, would then go not only within the class, but without of the class. So these teachers would be active in the work that they would need to be doing. There would also be staff at the schools themselves who would then take what the district interventionists are saying and happening and doing and make that alive in the classrooms as well. We would also use one at one middle school, one for the middle school. That person would be in charge of our reading specialist in Hanson, would be in charge of our Title I person at the Whitman Middle School, but again, they would be the ones who are in charge of handling all of the testing, all of the results, and then doing the interventions for the small groups as they're needed. We would also need one K-5 special ed facilitator that you'll see in this budget. That person would be in charge of elementary special ed, would be helping Director Lauren Matheson of Student Services, and would be in charge of not only the inclusion aspect of what's needed for kids on IEPs, and also the regular sub-separate programs that we have in our schools. And the last piece is the iReady Read and Middle School Math Diagnostic Program. Right now, we've met with great success on our iReady Math testing program. This would be the iReady Read component of it, so we can further have a diagnostic that we say, where are kids at, how are they at, and then this diagnostic puts them on a path to be ready to increase their skills. The beauty of pairing it with the same company and the same procedures for math would be that as a teacher, it's one dashboard. As a student, you already know the system, you already know what you're doing, and then we can really target those skills. For those of you who remember last meeting when we talked about where we're at, we are still making gains with some of our students, but what we are seeing is significant delays also in some of our students, and this intervention regression program would attack that. Do you want me to jump
Jump to the Chromebook, please.
If I could jump to the Chromebook lease, we are very thankful that we have been able to purchase through some of our ESSER funds a little, almost 1,000 Chromebooks this year. Now that is great, that is awesome. When we then talk about, okay, are we going to be a one-to-one district? Well, the problem to that is that within a year and a half from now, we're going to have over 2,400 of our Chromebooks no longer be able to take any updates and and they're going to be at end of life. End of life does not mean that you cannot access the internet from them. End of life does not mean that you cannot use a Google Sheet or a Google document. But what it means is you can no longer, the operating system is no longer updated. And even worse, when we talk about the MCAS testing, it cannot accept the versions of the MCAS testing that we are doing. So this would be a formal leasing program on a renewal cycle so that we can keep Chromebooks in the hands of students, so that we can keep education and technology moving forward, and we can really then do what we need to do for students.
Thanks, George. I'm going to ask Lauren Matheson, our Director of Special Ed, to talk about what she's looking at to move our budget forward in the program she's presenting. Lauren.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. So in order to have a comprehensive continuum of services and programs for all of our students, it's important to look at where we may have some holes in the district and where we have some areas that we need to add additional supports. And so the very first thing on my list is the Whitman Middle School Inclusion Program. And really just looking at revamping the current service delivery model of how we support our students in inclusion. And the reason why this is important is research shows that in an inclusion model of co-teaching that has a special educator and a content area specialist that are working together in the general education setting with a good ratio of peer models with students with disabilities leads to the best outcome for students. And 5 years ago, we did this at the high school. We revamped the high school inclusion model. We infused special education teachers. We made co-teaching a priority. And what is happening at the high school is outstanding. We have an outstanding model, and it's been very successful. 2 years ago, when we added a language-based learning program at Hanson Middle School, when we infused those new special education teachers, in addition to the language-based learning program, it also added supports for the students in inclusion. So now we have kind of an inequity issue where Whitman Middle School does not have that same model. So for equity, we need to add 2 teachers and a paraprofessional to the Whitman Middle School Inclusion Program. And what this will allow us to do is to pair the content area teachers in English, math, science, and history to co-teach with a special educator. And we need to do this in a way, by adding the 2 teachers, we'll be able to keep the ratios of the model the way they should be. So a classroom should not be almost made up entirely of students with disabilities and only a couple of peer models. It needs to really be an equal ratio. So that's the first special ed program on my list. The second is an elementary language-based learning program. And currently we have a program that's a 6th to 8th grade program. It's housed at Hanson Middle School. It is a district-wide program. And 2 years ago, I developed this program. It was actually September of 2019, based on immediate student needs at the middle school level. It was actually one of the first things I did when I entered this position was to develop this program because we had an immediate need. Typically, a language-based learning program would, if the district was developing a program, you would start at the elementary level because disabilities in the area of reading, writing, and communication are best intervened in the early years. So we kind of started in the middle school level based on a need, and now we need to move back to the elementary level and start intervening earlier for these kids. So the proposal is to expand our current program to include a 5th grade classroom at Hanson Middle School, and also a 2nd to 4th grade classroom that would be housed at the Indian Head School. Again, this would be a district-wide program, so available for students both in Hanson and Whitman, but due to space and due to the 5th grade being up at Hanson Middle, it makes sense to keep the program all in Hanson so that students have a smoother transition. So that's the second. The third is a classroom for students with social, emotional, behavioral, and transition needs at the Hanson Middle School. This is not a district-wide program. This is a specific classroom need that we have at Hanson Middle School. And this classroom would meet the needs of students at Hanson Middle School in grades 5 to 8 who are either transitioning back from a hospitalization or a long-term absence due to medical issues. Also, students who may struggle to remain in the classroom all day because they require social emotional support. Also, for students who have behavior plans that have built into their day periods of break or rest or earning rewards for being on track with their behavioral goals. So that would encompass all of those different students. The reason I think we need that is last year we were able to add a TLC program at Indian Head through the cost savings of joining the South Shore Educational Collaborative. We saved on tuitions. We used that program to fill a need that we had. And so we have a therapeutic learning center now at Indian Head. So currently, students who are transitioning to 5th grade are left with only 2 options that are not ideal. They can either transfer to our therapeutic learning center that's at Conley for 1 year, and then make another transition to our therapeutic learning center at Whitman Middle School. So that's 2 transitions in 2 years for students who are struggling with social emotional issues. That's not ideal. The other option is to just have them go straight to Hanson Middle School without that support built in. So that's important. The other issue is the high school has great supports for our students that have social emotional issues. We have the ALC program, we have our BRIGHT program. You've heard me talk about that before. That's the Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition program that's designed to meet the medical and hospitalization needs of students. So this program would kind of fill both of those needs at the Hanson Middle School. The Whitman Middle School already has a therapeutic learning center that can meet these needs. So this is, again, giving us a continuum of services for students in both counts. The final thing on my list is an English language teacher. We currently have 4 EL staff members. 3 of them are full-time, 1 is part-time, and they're covering 6 buildings right now. So we don't have full coverage. They are traveling around the district. Adding 1 more teacher would allow for a full-time person at each elementary school. Right now, our increase in students is at the elementary level, and we have a huge increase in students who are considered level 1 by their access course. So they're coming to us young with very little, very limited English. And so having a full-time EL teacher at each elementary school will help us provide the services to bring them up to a level 3 or 4 quicker by having more direct services available to them. So those are my proposed additions. We do have a moderate level of service cost increases. Jeff alluded to it a little bit before. Transportation is up this year. There was no way around that with the transportation laws that are requiring students who are unable to wear masks, which is a lot of our students in out-of-district programs. They have to have single service van rides. So we are now where we used to be able to put, 3, 4, 5 students on a van. We have many students riding singly now in a van, or down to only 2 students. So there's been an increased cost there. We do have standard tuition increases, just the standard 2-3% that we tend to see every year. And then we do have related service cost increases. Jeff mentioned the struggle that this year has been for our students in out-of-district programs. We've had a great year in district because we were able to open school in September full-time every day for our students in our sub-separate programs and our English learners. They have had a great year and they're thriving and they're doing well. Unfortunately, a lot of our students in out-of-district programs have experienced shutdowns, COVID-related shutdowns. Some programs have shut down multiple times just because of the number of cases. Many students have missed 5-6 weeks or more of their education. And these are students who really require structure and routine and their programming in order to make progress. So when that happens, there is an increase in the financial services that we have to provide, increased home services, increased evaluations, increased assessments, those types of things. So those are level service cost increases that we've seen this year due to COVID that will impact the budget next year as well.
Thank you, Lauren. And as I mentioned, I'm looking to refresh and put a teacher back in the halls of the high school, specifically in science, to allow that teacher that is teaching out of license back to teach within license, which will also reduce class size in the sciences at the high school specific. Strategic plan objectives that are covered in FY22 and our level services plus budget. We still continue to address the social emotional district-wide programs, which are Excel. Remember, even when we cut 19.2 teachers a few years back, we did add adjustment counselors at the elementary level. This budget keeps those folks in place. We continue implementing the assessment schedule K-5, which Mr. Farrow spoke about last meeting, with the emphasis on middle school and K-8 regression that he spoke to today. We also talked about the increased amount of mobile devices. We have them out there now, and the educational software, which we purchased this year and will remain in this budget, keep our licensure for that, for student learning and engagement, with our end goal, again, being a one-to-one district in the future. Strategic plan initiatives that are not added to the FY22 level services plus budget. As many of you know, we did address our strategic plan for 3 years. The committee approved that. This budget does not address, it addresses the objectives that we want to get through this year, but it doesn't address some of the initiatives that I think we need to plan on if we're going to fulfill our strategic plan in the next 3 years, which is tuition-free full-day kindergarten for our students, the restoration of a solid middle school foreign language program, and adjusting school start times, research-based change at the high school, moving that later to fit the research that says students should sleep in a little bit and get more rest, and then align our elementary times to provide district-wide professional development. Our 3 elementary schools are at 3 different times, so when we at any point in the year when we want to have 4th grade teachers at Conley, Indian Head, and Duval meet, they all have different start and finish times of the school contracted day. So if we are going to adjust school start times, these are the 2 areas that we'd like to address. This budget does not cover that. Just want to give you an overview of where we were at from 2014 to 2021. In 2014, our approved budget was $44,576,361. In 2015, we went to $45,318,587 with a 1.6 increase of the overall budget. In 2016, our final budget was $45,688,067 for a 0.08 increase of the school district budget. In 2017, we moved to $47,079,141 for a 3% increase. In 2018, the district budget was $48,688,028 for a 3.4% increase. 2019, $50,523,181 for a 3.76% increase. 2020, $52,425,738 for 3.76, and last year, $55,320,238 for a 5.5% increase. Thank you very much. both towns for supporting our 2021 budget. We are starting to get back on track from the losses of 2015 and 2016. Just to give you a little overview on what our local towns spend per pupil, and I am happy that we have moved to the $13,000 mark down here. So just to give you folks out at home who are just listening and aren't watching, in Abington 2019, Abington spent $13,805 per student. BR, Bridgewater Raynham, spent $13,022 per student. East Bridgewater spent $12,396 per student. Duxbury was at $15,935. Hanover was at $16,618. Hingham was at $14,029. Marshfield was at $13,611. Pembroke was at $14,228. Rockland in 2019 was $15,847. Situate was $15,235. Whitman-Hanson in 2019 was $13,405, and the state average in 2019 was $16,618. I don't have the numbers from last year in 2020. This comes from the DART page from DOE, the DART folks. If anybody's interested, if you go to this website, you can find out a lot of information and comparisons with our local districts. And find out how we compare and give our, and actually you can get a really good financial outlook of our regional school district. I'm sorry if I'm talking too loud, I'm right under the microphone. Chapter 78, two local districts in 2020. Just a comparison, if we look back at per pupil expenditures, this is the amount of money in Chapter 78 our local towns get from the state. In Abington, they get $8,933,994. In Bridgewater Raynham, they get $22,061,362. In Duxbury, they get $5,340,535. East Bridgewater receives $10,847,253. Hanover, $7,023,879. Hingham, $7,695,110. Marshfield received $14,664,853. Pembroke received $13,608,754 or $752. Rockland received $13,843,235. Situate received $5,863,240, and Whitman-Hanson received last year $24,776,700. Again, the DART page can show you the comparisons. I show you this slide to say we receive quite a bit of money from the state compared to some of our other local districts, and we are getting there, but we are still spending less per pupil than our other, our friends across the street. Our staffing in our community, or in our school district, this comes right from the DESE website, from our October 1st report. We have 498.6 employees. 20.4 of these employees are grant funded through grants in the district. So just to give you an idea, these are our staff members. We have 304 licensed staff members teaching in the classrooms. Increases that we're asking for in the FY22 budget. Our salary lines, as I mentioned, we are in negotiations with our bargaining units, but I did put an earmark at $1,071,450. This can go up and this can go down. We are still in negotiations, but we did put an earmark there. Our PCA pension is up $116,700. Our health insurance, we're estimating at $100,000 increase. Our regular day transportation, we are negotiating a contract, but we're guessing it's going to go up $90,000 this year. Custodial services, we're still negotiating. We're looking at a $42,600 increase. Gas and electric utilities, up $40,000. The water bill is a TBD. We don't know where our settlement might be, and we also don't know an actual increase of the water because we haven't gotten a water bill that's been accurate. So this is a TBD. This will be an increase. Our trash is at $5,000 as an increase. This is the high school teacher. This is the intervention regression program that George spoke about. This is the special education programs that Lauren spoke about. And this is the technology refresh for Chromebooks for an increase of the school budget from last year of $2.6 million, $2.635750. So what we're looking for, last year's approved budget was 55,320, 238. Our prelim budget, this is where we start off, was 57,955, 988, with a 2.635750 increase, which is 4.76% over last year. Just to give you an idea of our salaries versus expenses, our salaries look at to be this year to cost us $31,154,756. Our other expenses in the district to run, $26,801,232 for a total of $57,955,988. These expenses include transportation, technology, as we've spoken in the past, underfunded and unfunded mandates, curriculum, and special education costs. What makes us unique from other town departments? A selectman asked us last year to present this slide, and I think it shows some decent information. Other town departments who are our friends actually don't have to pay some of these expenses. They're incorporated from the town. So employee benefits, this is what we spent last year. For our PCA pension, we spent $1,211,606. Employee health insurance was $4,444,771. Retirees health insurance was $2,210,128. Those are just employee benefits that are covered by the towns. Support expenses, this is what we spent last year total. Water and sewer was $76,875. Heating costs for the district were $311,881. Electricity was $737,656 or $654. Unemployment was $47,154. Property and casualty insurance was $238,715, and workman's compensation insurance was $176,729, for a total out of our budget of $9,455,513. It's a good chunk of money from the district budget. These are our revenue sources that we're projecting in 2022. State revenues at $25,951,287, or 44% of our budget, 44.78%. Local receipts at $90,693. We are putting in circuit breaker money, which is our special education reimbursement, at $600,000 for the FY22 budget, which is 1.04%. And what we're looking for the towns to offset those revenues as the $31,314,008, or 54.03% of our budget in assessments. Using the agreed statutory method from last year, these are what our assessments, preliminary assessments, look to be. The Hanson assessment would be, the operating assessment is $13,114,756. That does not include non-mandated busing at $103,572. Our capital technology, HVAC, at $140,269. The Hanson's portion of the high school capital is $277,465. The Whitman's operating assessment outside of non-mandated busing and capital is $16,827,516. Non-mandated busing is $422,595, and capital for the high school is $427,835. Now, before we get into questions, there's another piece that I don't have a slide for, but people have heard about ESSER 2 coming from the federal and state governments. Whitman-Hanson right now is scheduled to receive $1,001,000 in ESSER funds. We have not received it. There has been no check sent. $10,000 of that grant has to be earmarked, if we call it a grant, has to be earmarked for social emotional learning when we return to school in September. There's been much discussion now and debate and lack of clarity about what the remaining funds will go to. We have been told, and I have seen documentation, that 75% of the remaining funds will go back to the two towns in the form of helping them out with the increases of their minimum local contributions. So each year, minimum local contributions have gone up. Hanson would get a portion of that $990,000, and Whitman would get a portion of that $990,000. I don't have specific numbers, but that would ballpark in the realm of $350,000 for Hanson and $400,000+ for Whitman, which could potentially offset the assessment cost. We hope to have more information at the March 10th meeting. Mr. Tuffy can speak to this if we have questions about it. He has contacted DESE, and there's much discussion and confusion in the Commonwealth about how to use ESSER 2 funds. If that 75% of the monies go to the two towns, the regional school district will have $242,000 or so remaining that we hope to keep in case we have additional needs next year when we open, especially in the areas of regression, PPE, testing of students, testing of teachers for COVID. We don't know what those funded or unfunded mandates were there are coming out. On the 10th, we should have more information about ESSER 2, which will absolutely impact the assessments for both communities. This concludes the formal presentation of the budget. I am going to come back and stop sharing the screen and bring back the committee for questions, and then we can open it up to our attendees if they have questions. So committee members, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask any questions of us here first, and then I'll open it up to the community.
Questions, anyone? Mr. Howard, Ms. Byers is next.
So Jeff, thanks for putting this together. Certainly, I know we're kind of, I know we just got the packets, and this is the first presentation. So I know I'm sure all of us will want to digest it a little bit more between now and the next meeting. On the special education, though, specifically, is there any return on investment, so to speak, in terms of those investments that we're making in terms of those programs that are necessary? And do we believe that that will curb any type of current or future costs as it pertains to out of district service utilization? So do we anticipate that by doing some of these things now, it's perhaps going to save us something in the future, or is that not specific to these programs?
So yes, I'll speak for you, Lauren. I'll just jump in. The middle school language program that Lauren put together and the language program that we moved to the high school this year was specific saving measures. Those students would have been out of district at some point, either in a placement or potentially residential. Right now, we have some of our elementary students who are language-based students that are out of district in placements. By putting this program together, we can keep them home, and it's cost effective. One, they can stay within their home district, and two, it's cost effective. So that elementary language-based program specifically is the program that will keep kids back in district and save us money over time.
Is there, and there may not be, is there any way to quantify to what extent some of that looks like, or not really?
So we'll table that question. I'll get that information for the March 10th meeting, because I also can show you what we spend in the budget book for out of district transportation and out of district students. Chris, the reason we presented it this way is I want people to see it, think about it for a couple of weeks, instead of coming into a meeting without the presentation. So I'm using the term marinate on these numbers, marinate on what you would like to see or not, and come in with questions, and you can hear from your community members what their concerns are when we come in through the 10th. Dawn.
Thank you. I'll make a couple comments here. I didn't see enrollment as part of this presentation, so I'd like to see some class size numbers, if we can get those at a future meeting, and how the current staffing levels will impact enrollment next year. Whether, I know we have a large population who some pulled their students right out of school and truly went homeschooling. So are we asking and reaching out to those families that if there's a full in-person return to school in September, do they know if they'll come back or not? Because, so can we poll them? I have a couple questions on the special ed, and also the intervention focuses on elementary and middle school, but do you have any intervention planned for the current 8th graders. So they would have lost time in 7th grade, currently 8th grade, and then moving up to the high school. So are there plans for that? And just my question, my question on the TLC. So we have one at the Indian Head that was created and at Conley. Can you tell me about the TLC Center at Duval and at Whitman Middle School and how that is comparable with the other schools?
Sure.
Who wants to go?
So a couple of those are mine, so I'll address a couple of them. So in terms of our 8th grade students, we do have a summer program available for students, both regular ed and special ed. And they actually, over the last couple of years, have done a wonderful job working together so that they're seamless. We have a fabulous summer program for our upcoming 8th graders. They get to work on their summer reading. They get to practice literacy and math skills. Students on IEPs get to work on their IEP goals to prevent regression. Last year we weren't able to do quite as many field trips because of COVID. I imagine there might be some limitations again this year, but there's a huge social emotional component to it, community building, trips, and just getting the 8th grade students acclimated to the building. They get to meet a ton of the teachers that they're going to end up having. They feel comfortable in the building. I think we do a really good job with preparing our 8th grade students who are coming up to the high school. So I wouldn't say it's anything new that we're doing. I think just the existing plan and program that we have in place for 8th graders is a good one. So that would continue for them.
Can I just jump in? So that's part of that, if we don't use ESSER 2 money and we see the need, if Dr. Jones and his intervention teams, if his staff team sees that our 8th graders need something specific after school outside of our 21st Century Grant Program or any interventions he sees, that's why I said I'd like to hold on to any of that ESSER 2 money in FY22 and not spend it on this budget. I'd like to keep it there in case we need to move into more interventions either at the secondary level or at the elementary level. I'll answer your question about we didn't do enrollment for this because I want to show you how our enrollment is decreasing in the overall. And I hope to have, we contracted with NASDAQ to do an enrollment study in Whitman for the Whitman Building Project. They are also doing one for Hanson. So I can show you our trends of enrollment, hopefully to 2030 by the March 10th meeting. I don't know if I'm going to have class size numbers by March 10th because right now the elementary, or our principal focus is going to be re-entering kids for sometime soon. And that's going to be the committee's decision within the next month or next week on when we're coming back. And yes, Dawn, we have 96 students out at homeschool. We average around 20. My assumption, once we're safe, those kids will be re-entering the school and coming back, but we can get something out there. What I don't want to do is ask parents whether or not they're coming back and them having confusion about coming back in spring or in fall. So we will get those numbers and we will show the committee where class sizes are. I will say the influx of the teachers from last year will absolutely benefit class size. Lauren, did you want to talk about TLC?
Yeah, sure. So with all of our district programs, because we are a regional district, our programs are housed in not every single school. So just to give you an example, if you're a student in our district who has autism, regardless of whether you live in Whitman or Hanson, you're going to attend our program that's for students with autism that happens to be located in Whitman. We have a program at the Duval School. Same for students who are on a non-traditional diploma track. We have programs for those students who are practicing daily living skills, vocational skills. Those programs are for everyone in both districts. However, they're located in Whitman. Those are at the Duval School. And so for our therapeutic learning center that you asked about, we have a district-wide program. It's for students that is at Conley School, and then at the Whitman Middle School, and then at the high school. Just this last year, due to need and space, we did add another program at Hanson Middle School, so we have that added program. But right now, if you're a student in Whitman, you would go to the Conley School or the Whitman Middle School if you needed the TLC program. But our programs are for the district, not necessarily just for an individual school, unless we see a need, which is what we saw last year when we came into some of that extra funding from the tuition savings that we saw at South Shore Educational Collaborative. So we had a need. We actually have, I believe we're up to 6 students now in our TLC program at Indian Head. So whenever we look to create a program, we're looking at cost savings and we're looking at a cohort of students. It doesn't make sense to create a program for maybe just 1 or 2 students. It doesn't make sense to bring in all the staff and the space and make the changes when it's 1 or 2 students. It makes sense to send them to an out-of-district program where they'll have a cohort of peers in a classroom. But whenever we look and we see a group of 3, 4, 5 students, it's a cost savings to the district to develop the program, cohort those students together, and provide those services together. So that's why we kind of stepped outside the normal district programming that we had previously, which was for students with social, emotional, behavioral issues. Our programs just so happen to be housed in Whitman, but we added an elementary program at Hanson just because we had that need. We had those 4 or 5 students that had the need, and our Conley program was pretty full. Social emotional needs, especially for elementary students right now, is on the rise. The COVID hasn't helped that. Us being able to add a program at Hanson at the elementary level was great. Would I love to see a program in every building? Absolutely. But in terms of looking at cost savings, looking at where we have holes in our programming now and what our top needs are, I don't see a need to have a TLC at every program. I feel like the programs that we have currently at the elementary school meets the needs of all of our students in both towns.
I have a follow-up question. Can you tell me what the savings was from the South Shore Collaborative that allowed you to create the TLC at Indian Head?
I don't have them now, but I do have those figures and I can get them to you.
Okay, and also how many Duval students go to the Conley TLC?
Again, I can get that number for you.
I believe I looked at that number, and don't quote me right now, Lauren will get you one, but we had one.
One student. So are all students at Duval who have this need, are they being accepted at Conley or at Indian Head TLC?
Yes, we have a whole procedural protocols that we follow if a student is being considered that their needs can't be met in their current programming, and we're looking at maybe doing a move to a different program across the district. Both teams from both schools get together, we do student observations, we review evaluations, the team makes that determination. It's not one person that makes the decision, it's a team decision. And we do have a process for that.
Okay, so if I understand the programs that are being offered right now, there is plans for a TLC Bright Classroom to be funded and put into Hanson Middle School. There is one at Whitman Middle School. There was one created at Indian Head. There is one at Conley, and there is one at the high school. So Duval School is the only school in the district that does not offer this. So at this point, I would say that this is no longer a district-wide program. This is a program being offered in every single school except for Duval School. I would like to see funding made available so all students can equitably have this service. A Duval school student should not have to move from one school to another if all other students do not have to either. These are students who was explained to me during a building tour last September when I toured Conley, and this was created, that this is the last stop for students in trauma before they receive an out-of-district placement. So to me, a student who has trauma at Duval School and is then being asked to move to Conley, if they're a first grader or a second grader, they don't know that that school is still in their town. To them, that may really seem like an out-of-district placement because it's a new building, it's a new place, it's new teachers who they're not familiar with. So I think that we should be able to look at this line closely.
Can I
I have Mr. Boyce, Mr. Small, then Hillary. Thank you, Hillary. Mr. Boyce.
No, let Hillary go first and then I'll follow Hillary. Because I think she wants to
I
talk
just
on
want to
Don.
address directly what was just being discussed and maybe more timely for her to speak right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, Don, I totally hear what you're saying. But I wanted to say that all the services are being offered in both towns at all levels. They might not be in every school building, but the services are being offered to all the students in both towns at all levels. I think if I heard Lauren correctly, the reason why it's going to the Hanson Middle School is to limit the transitions that those students are going to have, and those are students who don't transition well. I think
all students are needing to be transitioned to, and they don't transition well. And Lauren just said during COVID, social emotional is more in need, and I find it hard to believe there's only one
she
student
also
at
just
Duval.
said there's one student at Duval, so I would trust her and Jeff and George to, if there was a need for a TSA program at Duval, to create one. I really think that that is something that we can entrust them to do if there is a need for that. There's only one student at the building, you know, at that, if it's full, I understand why they made one at Hanson, but to say that we need one and then we have one child in there, that's a waste of money. That's a waste of services. When we need to find places to put them, you know, when we can take that and put it somewhere else, that's all. I mean, we're not denying services for students in Whitman. We're not. And I think that needs to be, that's important that that's stated, because you're making it sound like students in Whitman are being denied this service and they're not.
I have heard otherwise from parents that they have been. I have. So I'm speaking on behalf of my constituents.
Do you have a list of those constituents that you can provide to the administration, please?
And
I
I,
will,
I
I
know
will,
as a school
I will
committee
handle
member, when I hear something like that and I have a complaint, my first role is to ask them to contact the building principal and to try and show their concerns, et cetera, and follow the protocols that are set in place. I ask them to keep me in the loop and follow through. And they contact the building principal. If they don't get any results there, then you bump it up to the superintendent's office. Again, I take a step back, as I'm supposed to. It's the parent advocating for their child with the superintendent's office. You know, you're talking about unmasked people, you know, masked people. I don't know who you're speaking of, but if there are people, I wish you would present a list, give it to administration, and let's put it through. There's one elementary school in Hanson. There are two in Whitman. We have the service in one elementary school in Hanson. We have the service in one elementary school in Whitman. We don't want to deny any child the services that they need. Just that simple.
so I would publicly, if anybody has any issues in their child, if you feel like a building administrator or your child's not getting services, go through the channels of talking to the principal and then bumping it up to Lauren. This is why we're trying to put these programs in place to meet the needs of all students. We don't have some special ed services in Whitman. At the Whitman Middle School, we see the need, and that's why we put it in the budget. And again, this is our initial presentation. Things can change as we move forward.
Mr. Boyce.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all, Lauren. I know exactly how you're speaking and very well of what you're speaking. You know, it's only been a few meetings that we've had this year for the Pilgrim Area Collaborative, or it seems like it. We started off in October, November, December, and we skipped January, we had February. But even in those 4 or 5 meetings that we've had, just learning on our enrollment for this year, it could be much huger for these collaboratives next year, as to what I'm seeing. I could be totally wrong, but our enrollment is down. It could be the same at Social Collaborative or North River Collaborative, but and this is what I'm hearing from you. You've got it in the perfect place to have the structure and the means so that these students do stay in district if they need it, do move out of district if that's the more cost-effective way. And also it just builds for next year the right things in place, because it could be that once they get back in school full time is when the problems or the situations might arise. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any committee members before we go we have a hand raised in the public? Anybody else want to have a specific
Mr.
question?
Wall.
I do. And I'm sorry for jumping in. That's not what was on my mind at the time. Couple of things. The intervention regression, the 307, was it 370,000? One-time expense. Would that be more apt to see if the towns have any CARES Act money? And could that those monies be spent, on those particular items there for, regression? It's directly related to education. It is due to COVID and due to being outside of the buildings, that or the ESSER 2 funds.
So Fred, can I just answer that quickly? We met with both town administrators today. I think we've exhausted the amount of money that we're going to be able to get through CARES, unless there's another release of CARES. I am hoping that the Fed kicks in with another stimulus that we could use towards this. That's why I say it's in the budget, but it might be ESSER funds, it might be federal funds, it might be there, and if we actually have town meeting in June, it might take the Fed that long to get us those funds, and we might be able to pull it off of the assessment. But we needed to show the committee and the people in town what we need to focus in on and add that to the budget.
Quick question about the restoring the high school science teacher.
Yes.
We're using we pulled someone that is not licensed for science, but they're licensed in another area.
Right now, specifically, it's chemistry. I have a teacher who's certified in biology, teaching 3 sections of chemistry.
Okay, so they're taking on an additional load?
Yeah, they still have the same teaching load, but they're teaching out of license, so we are flagged by DESE that we have an unlicensed teacher. If we bring this teacher back, we have a licensed chem teacher, and that will then reduce the bio class sizes that had to increase because we took 3 sections of bio off the grid to have her teach chemistry.
Okay, understandable now. Okay, and the other thing, the 20 some odd positions that are granted, or grant funded, I should say.
Yes.
Are those within the $57,955,988 budget?
No.
No, they're not. The $57 million budget that you're looking at is what we call the appropriated budget. That's the money that comes to us for Chapter 70, which supports the in-school program as well as the assessments. The money we get for grants is used to pay for those salaries, and it comes directly from the grant. So it's not anything that is appropriated by the town.
Thank you.
Hillary, I think you had a question. Hillary.
Hillary?
Yeah, Hillary.
Hillary, then Dawn.
I just had a question about the intervention staff. So my understanding is that they would look at the data, but also be working with the students in small group instruction. Is that correct?
Yes, so the goal of this would be they would be charged with making sure that we do our interim assessments. So they'd have iRead and math to do that. Once that data is collected and we find that data, then they would be in charge of creating the groups at the different tiers for intervention, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, hopefully not on the road to end up at a special ed referral.
Okay, so that was my follow-up question. Would those teachers, so students on 504s and IEPs would receive their services from different teachers than these teachers?
Yes, that is the goal. So these would be available to work both within the schools and externally from the schools to prepare all of it and then do it in the classroom. There would also be a professional development aspect to this in a tier 1 structure, which is let's say the least impactful intervention for a student that can still be done in the classroom. So these interventionists would also do training, would also do best practice for the regular ed teacher in the room to keep the child in the room as long as they can, either technology or small group. And then as they move to maybe a tier 2 intervention, which is a little more specific or a little bit more intense, I guess, then they would take on some of those groups themselves. There's also a training component that we put in to utilize some of our paraprofessionals in a different manner so that we can make sure that our neediest students are getting the access they need in a way that helps them with their regression piece, but also allows them to stay in the classroom during their academic time at the grade level they should be on.
Okay, so I guess the question that I would have is, do you think that the 2 elementary and the 1 middle school is going to be enough to assist with all of that? I guess we don't know right now because we're still collecting data on regression, but a concern that I have is that those teachers are going to be stretched really thin. And I don't know if I mean, obviously it's a budgetary item, so a plan hasn't been put in place, and so much as how often, if we're working with a tier 1 group, how often are those students, or is the goal going to be to work with those students, right? So if you've got 2 teachers in 3 elementary schools and 5 grades in each elementary school, I just wonder if that's enough. And I know that that's maybe, I'm pushing it, but I know that is something that the regression is a concern that we all have. So I just wanted to, I don't know, say that, get that out there.
And in my first go around, we talked, and I was hoping for 6. So I was hoping for 2 at each elementary, and then it would be in ELA and math focus. However, it's probably the fact that I've been here since 2003 and 4 that I understand that we want to do what's best in a way that's also being able to be supported. So the goal of this is going to be a 2-pronged approach where this position would not only focus on help for students in small group directly, would also be on help for staff. And then as we move forward, if there's a training piece for the teachers that helps eliminate some of the tier 1 or the less impactful or intensive ones, we could then move forward. This would then, in its infancy, move forward and we see what the results were. But I don't disagree with you at all, but I also tried to take a look at, and we tried to take a look at, what do we think is doable within the constraints of the budget in both towns.
Right, and I understand that I am absolutely pushing it by saying that, but just wanted to put it out there for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like that question about, is this enough for the support? And I noticed at the beginning of the budget, superintendent said that what this presentation is it's minimal support, right? So I think that's important to keep in mind, that while some of these budget numbers may look big, it is the minimal that we are planning for remediation. As far as revenue, I'd like to see if we can get some information in the future at a next meeting around either declining revenue related to school choice and charter school, and how those numbers play with, we used to get a lot of school choice incoming, and how those numbers are changing. And last, I have a question on the last page for the assessments. And it relates to the figures on the operating line. I know Whitman may be looking at their operating line 175 for their town budget. And I'd like to ask if this 16.8 million figure includes these 2 non-mandated and capital based on this overall budget presentation number. I'm thinking that
Doesn't.
the operating assessment would be closer to 16.1 million. So if we can get clarification on what's included in that 16.8, as well as for Hanson, the 13.1, does that include those 3 numbers below that?
It doesn't. So really, in keeping with the way we've provided assessment information in the past, and especially in the letters that go to the community to transmit the assessment we expect to get, the operating assessment is inclusive of what we will spend in the schools, as well as transportation that is mandated. In addition to that, we will assess people for non-mandated busing, and then capital is also a separate assessment. So to be clear, the total assessment is the sum of all those numbers you see in a column. They're all separate, done separately. And while we're talking about assessments, these are draft at this point in time. I'm sure they will change as we get some specificity from the state. The other thing I would say is that when we get to non-mandated busing, actually there was a meeting last night where we talked about non-mandated busing. We're going to need some better numbers, and we're just really getting them now. So it should be considered a sort of order of magnitude assessment. And by that, I mean, it's not going to be this number. It's probably going to change, but I wouldn't expect it to change dramatically. When we get to capital, Hanson gets assessed for two items. One is capital / high school, and that's the construction cost of the high school building that we happen to be sitting in right now. The other item is capital for technology / HVAC. Those were projects that were separate in Hanson, and as a result, only Hanson is paying them back. That number right now is the number from last year. Just today, I received an email that Hanson has come up with a repayment schedule that they want to institute next year that is somewhat different. And so that number will change. It will affect only Hanson. It will not affect Whitman. I had that conversation with the town manager today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we get to the chat?
Quick one, Jeff.
Well,
Go ahead, Ted.
I know we've received some federal and state monies recently. There was $267,000 that we were getting in two payments, one in February, I think the other one in April. There was $200,000 that we received between our state reps and Senator Brady that for $200,000. And I don't know if there's any money left in ESSER 1. Is there a way that we can get an accounting as to what might be left in those monies? Number one.
Fred, next week, we didn't want to confuse CARES reimbursement or those funds with the operating budget for 2022. So you will get an accounting of that next Wednesday when we talk about returning to school.
Okay, and do you know how they're allowing the carryover from one fiscal year to the next? If we did have any of those monies left over, would they just end up flowing back to E&D? In other words, could we use them for some of the remediation costs if we do find needed for next year?
Yes, ESSER 1 rolls in 2022 and ESSER 3 goes till 2023. So we will use those funds. It's really going to depend on what we get for reimbursables and CARES. Again, I don't want to confuse reimbursables for expenses in 2021 with the FY22 budget proposal. There's a lot of money in CARES out there, and the dollar figures you just spoke about are really being used right now for COVID-related expenses and performing what we are doing now as asked by our community to give our students that remote learning experience, to give them the technology experiences in form of Chromebooks. But we will give you an itemization of that and really talk about that next week or next Wednesday when we talk about return to school. And then we can itemize what the two towns have for CARES, what's been reimbursed, where we might come up short, and how we will be using ESSER 1 if needed. And again, if ESSER 2 does come to fruition, where that might line up in FY22.
And
well, I believe I know the answer to this question. If you could just affirm it. I don't believe the towns have said no to us at all. They've been very receptive to any of our needs.
That's correct so far. We did meet with Lincoln and John today, had a great meeting with the two, and looking at what they have left, what we've submitted, and where we might come up. So John, you have another answer for you for Fred. So John.
Well, actually, it's just to answer one of the questions that you had, and the question was, if there's any money left over, could it go into E&D? And the answer is no. As with all grants, if we don't spend it, it gets returned to the agency that provided the grant. In this case, it's either I guess they're all of these grants that we're talking about come from the Department of Education in Massachusetts, but none of it reverts to E&D. It would revert to them. It is highly unlikely that we will not spend every dime.
Now let's keep Commissioner Riley's money. That's all.
Anyone else from the committee before we move for any of the attendees? Thank you. Jeff, you have a question?
Yep. So Ryan, I don't know how to admit people in. So if you can, I think Ms. Conley has a question.
Yes, so Corinne was put in charge of doing this from the
Okay, I think Ms. Conley's here. Ms. Conley, can you? You're
Hi,
on.
Jeff. How are you? This, and George and Jeff can speak to this. I think this was 3 or 4 years ago. Jeff and I had a conversation. I had you send, I'm Rosemary Conley. I'm from Whitman Finance Committee. I had numbers sent over to me about when IEPs were introduced, and there was a concerning pattern of our Title I schools having IEPs not, so at the lower levels, we saw them in the schools that weren't at IEPs, had IEPs at the lower levels, but on the Title I schools, we saw that they weren't until about high school. We started to see an increase. Now, I really think it's dangerous to wait for the parents to call, because the law requires the school to educate the child that they have. So the recommendation was for if a parent calls and does something, well, what if a parent, English isn't their first language? And we talked about this because we saw a pattern of this poorer schools not giving the services to children young. I think Mrs. Byers' question was solid. It is unusual for our poorest school, our Title I poorest school, to have only one child. I think we need to relook at those numbers again, Jeff. I think we got a problem. Thank you, Ms. Byers, for bringing that up. I think that was a keen eye on your part. Thank you.
Ryan, I don't see, or Corin, I don't see any other hands.
Anyone else?
Yep,
John Galvin.
I think I got you, John. I think, I don't know, trying. John, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
I thought I did. Okay, there we go. You have me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. John Galvin, High Street, Whitman, Mass, also Whitman FinCom. I have a question on the pie chart, on the revenue sources. The question I have specifically regards the number used for the local receipts. Is that money that comes from like building usage and field usage and things like that? I'm also questioning the state revenue number. In the time that since you present that, I was able to call up the state cherry sheets, and that's actually the estimated receipts. Shouldn't the net receipts be in that area and not the estimated receipts? Because there's like $1.1 million in estimated charges that come out of that $25 million in the state number that you're using. So I'm concerned how these all add up. It just doesn't make sense that that number is the way it is. So if you could answer that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, John.
So I think answering your first question, what constitute local receipts? It does not include items that would go into a revolving fund dedicated to a specific purpose. So building use is used to pay for the services provided and the cost of providing those services when a building's rented. Frankly, most of the money that goes into building receipts or building usage goes to pay the cost of custodial service and cleaning services. But that's a separate account, just as the athletic fees that parents pay go to support the athletic program doesn't go into the general fund, or the cafeteria, which is the largest revolving fund that we have. The funds go into the cafeteria account that provides for the services for food services. Now, what they are things that are receipts that we get are common to the entire region. So, for instance, we receive interest on our bank accounts. It used to be a bigger number than it is this year, and probably going to be smaller next year. But that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. We get reimbursement from the government for some services that we provide that are somewhat more medical in nature than academic. That's Medicaid reimbursement, and we get some funds there. So those are the sorts of things that go in, not any receipts that are specifically related to a program. Your question, was that responsive to your first question?
John, you still there?
I am. I wasn't sure if I was still on or not. Yes, it does. That answers that question. Thank you.
The second question, and we actually had this discussion about how to best present it. You're absolutely right. I mean, the state gives and the state takes away. So they give you revenues and then they have charges. The way we account for this, however, is to show the receipts in one place, and then the expenses become part of our budget, because when we pay, for instance, one of the costs related to that you're talking about from the state is charter school reimbursement, charter school costs or school choice, and we actually wind up paying that, and so we record that as an expense. So that's why we don't use the net number.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is those three line items that are used to offset are included in the budget somewhere.
Correct.
And we'd see that next week when you go line, or the next meeting when
Yes.
you go line item through line item.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Mr. Lamontina, I'm bringing you in.
Good evening, Jeff. Thank you for the presentation. Randy Lamontina, Selectman, Town of Whitman, 6 River Birch Circle. Just looking at the assessment, Jeff, do you know, can you briefly go over the increases from last year to each town, and maybe just
You had those.
Yeah, Randy, I don't have them, and I just wanted to focus in on this one. We can actually go the difference from last year, from the initial assessment we made at the first budget meeting, and then the overall assessments where we ended up. But I don't have those in front of me right now. I probably should have, but I don't want to confuse last year with this year. But we will speak about the difference between last year's initial assessment, when we used statutory in April, and then where we ended up after the dialogues and the split and what people paid. We can cover that next week.
all right. And my second question is do you predict any other grant funding or reimbursements possibly that we might see to affect the assessment to each town? I know there's some other reimbursements, and maybe you're going to go over it in the line by line item, but
So one of the big one is the ESSER 2, which will directly affect the assessments if it goes through, and we believe it's going to go through. Again, that's the $1,001,990 is going back to the regional district and the 2 towns in the form of 75% of that 990,000 will go to help offset what we believe, again, I'm speaking without clarity from the state, what we believe will offset the increases in local minimum contribution. We've also heard that the stimulus package from the Biden administration is going to earmark a lot of money for schools. That's why I think the longer we can go before town meeting, the clearer the budget might be as far as what is coming from the Fed and what might be coming from the state. Our reimbursables right now through CARES, we've exhausted that. We've spent quite a bit of money on this year, having kids be remote and being safe in school. I'm not hearing any additional monies outside of the ESSER 2 coming from the state, but I am optimistic that we might be getting something from the Fed at some point.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Is there any other comment or questions from the gallery? Bob?
Thank you, everyone. All these questions were good. It's good to get all of this out in front. As the superintendent has said, we will be having a more comprehensive line by line at our next meeting.
On the 10th. On the 10th.
On the 10th. And all our school committee members will be provided a budget booklet, so you can look at it way before that and go line by line. I think that it was a comprehensive review. I'd like to thank all the administrators that are here. And I would entertain a motion to close this public hearing.
So moved, Mr. Boyce.
Small second.
Roll call.
Mr. Small,
Yes.
Spires,
Yes.
Sniffen,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Boyce,
Yes.
Tibbetts,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes, yes. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Small will make that motion.
Second, Mr. Boyce.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes, yes. Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Freeman,
Yes.
Mr. Boyce,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Sniffen,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Small.
No, yes.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Night.
Nice job, Ryan.
Night.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Brian.